Hi everyone, Alon Lits here from October Health. Really excited to have Carine Brady with me. She's had a phenomenal career across financial and professional services across South Africa and beyond. So really excited to have you here. Another fun fact is that I've known Carine for a long time. She was actually part of the team that hired me into my first job. So really great to have you here.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks, Alon. It's great to chat, and it feels like a blast from the past.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So really appreciate you being here. And as I kind of alluded to, you've had a great career, mainly in HR, but a bit broader than that with some of the world and South Africa's top brands. You mind expanding on that and giving the audience some more context?
Perfect. So my career started off in investment banking and mostly for global internationals. I headed up HR in most of the instances. My passion is to develop and grow companies and individuals from graduate level up to C-suite. And I'm very interested in transformation, talent development, and just ensuring there's authenticity in everything that someone does. So my most recent role has been as a COO, but as you rightly said, my focus has more been in HR. So I've worked for several companies, like I said, mostly internationals: Barclays, Investec, Citibank, a private equity company called Actis, and also then ventured into being a part of a law firm.
So guess you know what our high-performing cultures are all about, being part of those environments.
Yes.
I think what we're here to talk about is really two things. On the one side, how do organizations, obviously recruiting's tough, but once you hire the right people, how do you set them up for success within the organization? What are some practical takeaways that people can listen and implement within their own businesses? And then we'll end it. We'll touch on graduate recruitment, because I know that's a topic.
Yeah, that's a passion of mine.
Exactly. And I was a beneficiary of that. So
no, that's perfect. So I think integration plans are highly underrated in some firms. You recruit the person, and then from there onwards, you think, okay, great. Especially if it is a high flyer. You think, they've done this before, they've been around, they can just slot right in. But it can be detrimental to the top performer as well as your bottom line in the end. I've got a few facts for us, just in terms of, if we listen to Harvard, it says about 40% of hires that don't integrate efficiently in the first 18 months end up in leaving the firm.
Sure.
Which is not great. And it takes about 200% of a cost to company to replace an individual if the integration is not successful. That's productivity, recruiting costs, all of that. And then there's also reputational damage. And what's good about an integration program is about 70% of individuals actually feel a sense of belonging. The productivity is high. And, I think that is what you want to achieve. You want to have retention rates high, and you want to have that sense of belonging. So a thorough integration program, I think, is critical.
Yeah, no, I think it's, it's the right thing to do from a kind of person perspective, right, to make them feel welcome. But you've outlined some reasons from a business perspective to do it as well.
Exactly. Because also with an integration program, I think you need to personalize it for the person, rightly, as you said, because often I feel like if you have an induction program, great, but the integration program, I would say, needs to be between 6 and 12 months, at least. Well, from my experience, what I've seen out there, it's really beneficial, and to have several touch points during the 12-month period with the right people, so that there can be proactive feedback, there can be corrective actions taken. Because often I think, as I earlier said, you assume that an individual would understand how the company works. And that's where the planning comes in, to ensure that they get the right training, exposure to the right individuals. Global networks are very important if it's a global firm, to ensure that they connect with those. So definitely benefit in it.
Yeah, so I agree fully. What are some practical steps that organizations can take? And I think you've been fortunate in, working with smaller organizations that are global, and then very large organizations with thousands of people. So Are there commonalities? Is it different depending on the size of the organization? What practical steps or processes can organizations put in place?
So I think most importantly is to have the structure right. And as you rightly say, it's different for smaller firms to bigger firms. There's maybe more applications that the person needs to know of, more people they need to get exposed to. But I would say that first and foremost, you need to ensure that you've got the plan right set up. And then I think you need to show up. Because often I find, and that's from my experience, is that you've got this beautiful integration program, but then people don't arrive for the meetings, it's not well planned. And it's again that unwritten rules, that subtle kind of like nuances, and you assume a new starter will tell you everything, but they don't. And I think that's the biggest pitfall. And they won't tell you if they feel that there's a bit of a damage done if you don't show up, or if you feel that you're not adequately prepared for the meeting and you're just kind of shooting the breeze. So I think getting feedback before the meeting from the relevant stakeholders so that you've got something to discuss is very important. And having a safe environment where the person feels that they can share, that they can expose themselves. Because an integration program is all about the individual and helping them succeed more than it is for the company.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think there's also so many things that we take for granted being within an organization that we know just because you've been there.
Yes.
And then a new joiner just doesn't have that context.
Exactly.
So how are they meant to know these things?
Yeah.
So you've definitely got to be intentional in setting them up for success.
Yeah, it's those unwritten rules that we often talk about where people might think that that is acceptable, or they've maybe had a secretary all their lives. And I know specifically from my law firm experience, we were very hands-on always. So you had to make sure that the individual that you recruit and integrate understands the systems, the processes. You'd get feedback. I would specifically get feedback from the head of finance on, has the invoicing been happening correctly? Is the billing happening correctly? They need to obviously capture hours. Have they been capturing their time correctly? And you can then proactively address these, because I've been amazed at how sometimes you'd think that something is very obvious, but it's not. And then the second thing is also unlearning habits, because if you employ very senior laterals, they often come with preconceived ideas of how things should happen in an organization. And it doesn't always work like that. So they almost need to unlearn those habits in a safe environment where they don't feel like they're being attacked or, told that things aren't the right way of doing it. So all of those things that you need to take into consideration and individualize the program.
So I've got a lot of questions, but I almost want to take a step back and go to like day one or maybe day like -10. I don't know. It starts before that person arrives. But what are some of the things which, again, are maybe obvious, but organizations don't get right when a new person is when gearing up to join and arriving on their day 0 or day 1?
So I think we're obviously touching a little bit on induction now as well. And I think one of the big things that probably HR departments and businesses don't know is that, or they don't remember, is that it is important for you to get all the paperwork and all of those admin type things out of the way. I've read an article where they mentioned that some people's experience of an induction program is basically paperwork. So get that out of the way before you actually start, the person's first day starts. And there's such great programs these days that you can use where you can pre-populate forms, make it a lot easier, make it electronic. It's an email that gets sent off with a link to the person. They complete it online, their medical aid, all the other things happen, and you don't have to stress about it. Because the last thing someone wants to worry about is, am I on the medical aid when I join? So I think that's the first thing. And then I think once the person's arrived, to let the business understand that there is an induction program that needs to happen. So he's probably not going to be at his desk for the first couple of days, and that there's technical, because the technical training is also very important. So if there's technical training that needs to happen, that needs to be done kind of, as soon as the person joins.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And like little things like, well, if they need a laptop,
Yes.
make sure their laptops are there and their emails ready before
Good
that first day when they start.
Yeah, and that's again, Alon, you touched on a very good point. That's again that employee engagement, sense of belonging, I'm wanted here, the culture, what's the culture like? Do I feel accepted? Is there an open door that I can go to? So all of those things, it's very important. And there's nothing worse than the person starting on day one and there's no email address.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you speak about belonging and, kind of giving a person that safe space. And obviously the manager plays a role in that. But in addition to the manager, have you had any experience with, buddy programs or anything like that to ensure that there is someone who's maybe a friendlier kind of face that you can turn to with some of those questions?
Yeah, definitely. I think these days there are so many initiatives that are happening out there. If you look at Google's got their Noogle program, and I know Uber's got their university as well. So, there's a lot of creative ways to be inclusive. And I think buddy programs really have got its place and it's got its merits. There's actually a new initiative I've also heard of, it's Beyond the Buddy, which is where you get people on different levels to link in with the hire. And beyond time zones, departments, totally a different sets of eyes on, the department the person's in, for them to get a more global view of the organization. I've also read about doing sprints. So what's quite interesting is you can do like a cross-functional sprint where you basically get all the new hires from different areas who come together, and then they can come up with a new idea or they can work on a project, which is fantastic for the individuals because they get to know one another, but also for the company because, innovation is always top of mind. So that's an idea. And there's also think tanks, there's cognitive pods that you can think of where you can use AI actually to do psychometrics on people joining. I know Cloverleaf is one, Crystal is one as well, where you can actually do psychometric tests on hires and see what their thinking patterns is, how they solve problems, and you can put them together with similar teams or with different teams, and you can see how that all comes out. And it creates that feeling of innovation and sense of belonging and building a network, which brings me to the point, the global network's very important. So especially if you've got specific industries in your company, so that the person links in with the right focus groups, the right industries that they need
and
to
leverage that internal IP as well.
Exactly. So that's very important, because the worst thing is if you've been in your role for 6 months and you figure out, there's a industry group that talks every Monday evening, and you haven't joined the calls.
Yeah, it's a missed opportunity.
Yes.
I think like you touched on this point, but I think it's an important one around, obviously, like you spoke about the cost of churn to an organization, and that's super high. And part of the reason is you lose this intellectual IP within the business, and you lose that context that that individual had. And you touched on up front that, you need to set that expectation that if someone joins, they're probably not going to be at their desk for those few days, or not necessarily doing their day job. So how do you strike that balance between, probably a manager who, if they've lost a person or they're hiring this person, they need them to be adding value last week already, with, taking that step back and saying, well, we need to build that foundation to set this person up for success longer term?
I've had that. I've had that challenge a couple of times where literally they're like, no, we need them. They need to be on this matter. So, I always say HR needs to be a business partner, and you need to understand where the business is going. If you're too rigid in your approach, then your leaders aren't going to buy into your HR processes. So you need to always align your strategy, your HR strategy, to the business strategy. And if you can see that there's an imperative for the individual to actually get involved with something, hit the ground running and do something immediately, you need to be flexible enough to change the program so that it kind of aligns and supports the new starter, because it's also a stressful time for them. If they're sitting in IT training for the first 2 days and they know they've got to work on a matter, or there's a deal that's closing, you're also not going to get the best out of them. So it's a fine balance of compromise. Let's see how we can meet one another halfway. And I think that is why it's very important to individualize the integration program.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as you say, you're doing everyone a disservice if you're kind of forcing for the wrong reason, just for process sake. So you do need to adapt your process. And I think, again, maybe that's something which people don't, do in the midst of, well, we've got to follow this very stringent process, it's been said.
Yeah, and also some individuals' needs are slightly different to others. When it, like, I'd like to do like a needs analysis in the beginning of what, if we're not talking about training, what training the individual needs, and you'd be surprised. I've seen a few interesting examples of where you would have assumed someone would understand a certain program or package and they don't. So sometimes you need to tweak it a little bit and be flexible with how you're going to structure the technical.
So I think what, can, obviously these programs are important, but, unfortunately, sometimes individuals come into the organization, they want to start adding value and they feel like I'm going through a tick box exercise, right?
Yep.
I don't want to be in my IT training when I can be adding value. How do you make that experience enticing and valuable for individuals? Have you seen anything interesting out there?
So I have, in fact, seen that these days the trend is that there's a lot of gamification that's happening with induction programs, integration programs, where you literally can build a program where it unlocks certain departments for individuals and they can go in and they can explore it at their own pace. So I think that is quite
cool. It's a
cool.
reward. It's not a tick box.
Yes. It's almost like, when you do Discovery Vitality and you win your points.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's very similar to that. And I think that helps people to feel a bit more engaged in the process. You also have got other alternatives like videos that are pre-recorded where people can explore, but it's more a virtual reality type experience for them. I don't think all industries would probably have an appetite for it, but I do think with the new generations, people are more into those type of gamification kind of ways of work, and that could be interesting to keep people engaged.
Yeah, no, it immediately just shifts the mindset around something which I have to do to something that I want to unlock.
Exactly.
So I think that's super powerful. Maybe just kind of, you did touch on this, but, at what point do you consider, as we kind of close off this theme of induction, an individual to be inducted? Like, how do you know that, okay, this person is now ready and like you're confident that they're not going to be one of those stats in, 18 months time that resign because they never actually felt like they were part of the team?
So I think I work very closely with the individual during the integration program. So I'd literally sit in all the meetings with their line managers, these separate meetings as well with HR, and you get to know the individual and the concerns. And, something maybe I can touch on as well, in addition to your question, is the proactive honesty that the leader have to have with the starter, and to make certain that if there are concerns, that they get addressed early on, so that you've got time to work on it, so the person can work with me to ensure that they get skilled, trained up, understand the way things work, and I can guide them along the way with the buddy or the mentor. So for me, I think I can normally start seeing when it's coming to a close, because you feel like all conversations have been held, the person is running on their own, there's no more questions, the feedback has been very positive. And then normally can come to a close. I've had an example where we've had someone who actually very senior hire from another firm who came in, and she literally only had 4 sessions. And we felt that she understood the culture, the way we work, been bringing in lots of money. So, we were comfortable. There's others that take a little bit longer. And there's maybe areas of development that they need to work on, which you then touch on as you go along the process. And it's a normal conclusion then, when the person then comes to the end of it. Something else that I might also mention, just that's now sparked a thought, is that I found that integration programs not only work with new hires, but also with promoted individuals and also with people moving within the organization. So as you mentioned earlier, if there's a larger firm, people probably don't know all the departments that well. They haven't been exposed. So if they maybe move departments, it's important that you always also got like a mini integration program for them. And for promoted individuals, if they, the responsibilities are increasing and maybe they've become a leader, there's a different integration program for them. So you definitely can look at even if you don't hire as many people, there could be integration programs running at any time of the year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that we forget that like a new department is in some cases in large organizations a new world with different subculture within the broader organization culture. And similarly, as you go up the ranks, even like your support network would change, right? Because someone who was previously a peer is now maybe within a reporting line, and you can't have the same relationship with that individual as a result of that change in dynamic.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I find that often people who get promoted struggle with that element of all of a sudden being a manager and not a peer.
Yeah. So the rules change, and you've got to set that person up for success. So I want to just kind of, as we kind of shift gears slightly, still within the theme of new employee, but maybe looking at graduates, right? Which I think they're going to be in their first job by definition. So there's that additional nuance and complication. But maybe before we speak about setting them up for success, just because you are an expert in this field, and I think it's interesting to those watching, is how do you recruit the best graduates, right? Because is it just purely based on like their marks at school, university? Are there other factors that you look for? How do you run a robust process? Because it's not like hiring someone where you can see the results they've had in previous or similar roles. You can't get that job reference because a strong person academically may not be, a top performer in the working world.
Great. Very interesting topic, and something very close to my heart. So I'm very passionate talking about the youth of South Africa and giving them every opportunity I can to become the best version of themselves. So my experience with graduate recruitment is that, first and foremost, before you even start thinking about what quality you need and how you'd like to structure your program, is your brand. I think I've learned that if you have your brand out there in the market and students know who you are, it becomes an aspiration for them. And you immediately attract the better quality grads because they want to come and see what's out there in your firm.
Element of self-selection over there.
Exactly. So first and foremost, if you are thinking of a graduate program, I would suggest that you build your brand on campus. Affiliate maybe with an institution that focuses on grad building. I found that GradStar is an amazing, amazing place. And Laura from Black Box, she's been great and along the way with me in a lot of the instances of me running grad programs. So you need to make sure that you've got kind of like an affiliation and that you build your brand. And then I think what you need to do is you need to be creative in the way that you recruit your graduates. So yes, like you rightly say, is you probably don't have a reference on them. You know, a lot of people have got great marks, but do they have the grit that it takes? Are they actually interested in becoming the best of themselves? So what I've found to do is to have a tiered approach when selecting. First of all, obviously, you need to look at marks. That's very, very important. And then I think the individual needs to show to you that they've got the potential to become the best version of themselves. So what I've found is group talks are very good to start. So say you've selected your top 50 or top 100 that you want to look at according to maybe their marks. You need to then look at have they got the potential? And I found that often works well with them, asking them to do presentations, asking them to pick the topic that they want to tell you about, and group conversations. So that's a very good way to identify.
So how they interact in a team dynamic.
Yes. Yeah, and then obviously, it'll be also dependent on your industry, because some industries, I know in the financial industry, we're very big on maths of finance, and if they understand, how to build models. And maybe in a legal industry, it's more about drafting, and do they have the potential to become a great drafter, or research skills, how good a researcher they are.
Makes sense. That opens up another can around AI, but we'll park that and maybe get to that right at the end. But I think kind of with this lens, like you mentioned, this point of grit or resilience, which, is a hard thing to test. But what are some of the things in your experience where you've, really try to, understand, does that individual have the grit or the resilience to kind of adapt to a fast changing environment?
Very good question. So I think what we do normally is we throw them a little bit in the deep end, and that comes often with the presentation and asking them quite tough questions in the presentation. Obviously not to like hurt their self-esteem, but it is to test if they've got grit. So what we'd often do is we'd ask questions that are a bit left wing, or you kind of like out of nowhere. When you do the group conversations, you kind of ask them like quite controversial questions and see how they respond to that. It is a very tough one to talk about grit, because often you cannot see it beforehand. And I've had plenty of graduates come to me halfway through the program saying, look, this is just not for them. But yeah, grit is a very important element.
Yeah. And I think, it's probably the most important skill that people are going to need, right? Given that the world is going to be changing at this rapid and even more rapid pace moving forward.
Definitely.
So just in terms of, I guess, setting graduates up for success, are there nuances for a graduate program that may not exist in just the general employee onboarding that we've touched on before?
I think that the induction of a graduate is very different in that there's certain core skills that you need to ensure that you entrench in the individual, especially if it comes to your culture and the way that you would see an individual grow through your firm. I think often with more senior hires, you try and unlearn habits, but it's not always successful. But I think when you've got grads, it's a great opportunity for you to maximize actually the employee proposition. So what I tend to focus on is a lot of culture and values work, a lot of the world of work kind of like sessions with them, for them to understand. And often what I would do is I'd bring in an expert to do emotional intelligence training with them, grit training, how to manage upwards, how to handle conflict. There's obviously also a lot of competition between the grads. So how to manage that stress, how to be a team player. So there's all of those grounding factors that you need to touch on when you do the induction and integration of a graduate. It's also things that you would expect someone to know, they might not know. Everyone comes from different backgrounds, have different privileges. So some individuals might know of things and others wouldn't. So you can't leave anything for chance. So I think a grad program is actually really exciting because you've
a blank slate.
Exactly. Yeah. And I found that the grads are all very keen and they want to learn, and it's just so rewarding. I think that's why it's probably my passion.
Awesome. I love that. I think, you mentioned left field questions. You mentioned that being a good sign of grit. So maybe to close off, you also spoke about a law firm and like looking for like hard skills. Can that person draft? Can that person do deep research on case law? With the rise of AI, those things are probably becoming commoditized, right? So you can, maybe not going to be perfect, but get AI to do a draft one for you of a specific agreement. And in a similar way, get AI to do research for you, right? If you've got the right tools or the right level of access. So how do you think about that landscape and the kind of the future of work and what skills people are going to need, no matter what field they're in, but to really succeed in the world of work?
It's a very good question, because I think a lot of people in the professional services industry have been worried about AI tremendously, and if they're still going to have a job. So it's something that's been discussed quite a lot. And if you look at the legal industry, I think there's a lot of sensitivity around using AI. And I think a lot of the law firms specifically have been telling their researchers and the more junior staff to be very careful of using AI, because it's not always been tested. So there's initiatives that's happening at the moment where people actually testing the different AI tools, and because it will never replace Lexis or Jutastats for you to do your research properly, is just to spit something coming out of AI. So I think it's still a long way to go. It's not perfect yet, and I would caution anyone, if they do their research, to use AI, and maybe at this stage still use the conventional kind of methods of doing their research.
Awesome. So yeah, I think that's kind of work in progress, right? It's something
Exactly.
to be aware of and kind of tracking the latest.
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, I think we've really had a masterclass here in, how do you set up your new employees for success? A lot of practical tips and strategies that people listening can implement within their business, both for a more senior employee that joins, but also at a graduate level, also with that focus on graduate recruitment. So really love the conversation. Appreciate your time and your insight, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Alon. It was lovely. Thank you. I really enjoyed my time.